I think that these rocket attacks, it sounds so harmless, and in Europe you might think that, like the Israelis, they have the Iron Dome that intercepts the rockets anyway, so there's no reason to be worried. Well, it does intercept maybe 90 till 95% of the rockets, but we're talking about several thousand rockets that have been fired. Several thousand! And then 90 till 95% suddenly doesn't seem so much anymore.
Es war ein anstrengender Tag heute.
Although today was an exhausting day, it actually started really well. 30 degrees, sunshine, blue skies. In other words, everything you don't get in Germany during the grey fall season. However, things started to get awkward when I went out into the street to look for my bus stop. I wanted to go to the city center of Tel Aviv, but there was simply no one there. The streets were empty. There's usually always life. There are people jogging, people talking on their phones, and even on the bus, there were maybe 2 or 3 people sharing the ride. And somewhere that's comfortable, of course. You don't want to complain about an empty bus. But on the other hand, in a city that is usually crowded, an empty bus is maybe not the best sign.
Mitten im Herz von Tel Aviv?
Right in the heart of Tel Aviv is the main base of the Israeli army. And on the other side of the street is a museum. And that is where I got off the bus.
Deswegen bin ich dann auch aus dem Bus ausgestiegen. Sieht man direkt eine ganz, ganz lange Wand.
Immediately I could see a very, very long wall full of pictures. And the faces shown were not of those brutally murdered on October 7th. They were of all the people still being held captive by the radical Islamist terrorist organization Hamas.
Hamas hat wie der IS, der Islamische Staat, gehandelt.
Hamas acted like the Islamic State. They killed barbarically. Not only soldiers, but they barbarically murdered everyone they could get their hands on, especially civilians.
In die Finger kam und eben ganz besonders Zivilisten. Und wir reden ja wirklich von.
We're talking about children and elderly people. We're talking about young women.
Wir reden von jungen Frauen.
And those that did not get killed are now in the hands of Islamist rapists and murderers. This has nothing at all to do with resistance or even warfare. It was nothing but bestial joy in torture and murder.
Nichts mehr zu tun. Das ist bestialisches Morden.
And then I met the families of the hostages who tried to raise awareness, saying, like, watch out, our loved ones are still in the hands of these terrorists.
Unsere Liebsten, die sind immer noch in der Hand dieser Terroristen.
And some of the people told me that they think it would be better to be dead than captured by those Hamas terrorists whom they say are not animals, because animals wouldn't act that cruelly. Hamas, they say, is monstrous. I quickly realized that almost only local media covered the event, and I felt that nobody really wanted to listen to the families of the captives who are yelling, "Don't forget our family members that are held by those brutal captors."
Angehörigen, die jeden Tag in der Hand dieser Menschen sind.
And while I was standing in the square, listening to the families that were singing together, crying together, looking for some hope, and calling on politicians not to forget their loved ones, suddenly rockets came flying from the Gaza Strip. And suddenly you hear the explosions.
Boom. Ich denke, dass diese Raketenangriffe
I think that these rocket attacks, it sounds so harmless, and in Europe you might think, well, the Israelis have the Iron Dome that intercepts the rockets anyway, so there's no reason to be worried. Well, yes, it does intercept maybe 90 till 95% of the rockets, but we're talking about several thousand rockets that have been fired. Several thousand. And then 90 till 95% suddenly doesn't seem so much anymore. And there were also hits. And once a rocket hits an apartment, it completely wrecks it. The constant threat of rockets makes you feel that death is nearby and that you're forced to fight this war. And it does something to people. I've had a lot of good conversations. However, it's difficult to get people to open up in front of the camera. Because grief is a difficult subject, and so is fear.
Die Abnormalität wird dann auch besonders sichtbar.
The abnormality of the situation becomes visible when you realize that once the missile alert is over and the situation dissolves, things kind of go back to normal. Instead of breaking down, you go and have Mexican food at a mall.
Klar, es ist super leer einen herum, es ist nicht wie sonst, dass da viele...
I mean, sure, usually the food court is crowded with young people. And this evening the place was empty, and I had dinner all by myself. Yet it feels like people try to normalize the abnormal when, after being shot at with deadly rockets, you go and kind of like relax and have Mexican food, knowing that any second there could be another red alarm.
Wissend natürlich, dass es jeden Moment wieder einen roten Alarm, wie das heißt, geben kann.
I just don't think that anyone in Europe realizes what this alarm really does to people. This alarm that signals incoming and deadly rockets.
Gleich kommt eine Rakete.
And I'm pretty sure that no country in the world would tolerate that. But Israel seems to be the only country that is constantly being told to sit back and do nothing when enemies launch thousands of deadly rockets, explicitly targeting the civilian population. I mean, they're targeting schools, hospitals, and the airport. Yet Israel shall not react.
Aber Israel wäre ein Unrechtsstaat.
But Israel would be an unjust state if it did not protect its citizens.
Und die Hamas ist eine Unrechtsorganisation.
And Hamas is an unjust organization that slaughters people and abuses its own population as human shields.
Aus Schulen oder aus Krankenhäusern.
Hamas purposefully launches rockets from schools or hospitals, expecting that at some point Israel will retaliate and eliminate the threat, also causing innocent Palestinian victims that can then be shown in the media to damage Israel's reputation and turn victims into perpetrators.
Die zivilen Opfer natürlich möglichst gering.
Israel truly is the only country that is expected not to retaliate when its own population is being slaughtered.
Das passiert eben immer nur, wenn es Israel geht. Ja, das sind meine Gedanken jetzt.
Well, those were my thoughts for the evening. I'll work a bit more and see you tomorrow, I'd suggest.
Wir sehen uns morgen, würde ich vorschlagen.